silver cloud arrives in New York. The gleaming luxury liner elegantly glides over the calm waters of the Hudson River. Slowly, the silver cloud sails along the waterfront of Manhattan Island, where she's to dock. Here for us, another voyage is to begin, through American history. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Inscribed on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty, this poem by Emma Lazarus symbolizes for millions of immigrants the accomplishment of an arduous journey to the Promised Land. Over 16 million such people passed through Ellis Island between 1925 and 1954. New York, the melting pot of civilization, a city of gigantism and conflict, a phoenix whose feathers come from every country in the world. Port, ghetto, village, arrogant metropolis mirroring itself in water, New York is all of that. She entices, she exasperates, a hotbed of activity, of ups and downs. New York is change incarnate. The New York metropolis comprises over 17 million inhabitants. Everyone's on the lookout for work. It's what drives the country. New York's yellow cabs ride out the regular waves of immigration. After the Pakistani and the Haitians, it's now immigrants from the former USSR who are behind the wheel.
If you go all the way Broadway, you can pass Lincoln Center, Columbus Circle, Times Square.
Where do you come from?
I came from Georgia, south of Russia.
Where do other cab drivers come from?
Oh, from all over. Any country you can see cab driver.
It's October 12th, a bank holiday in the United States. Christopher Columbus's arrival in the New World is feasted as only the Americans know how. Brass bands of every nationality, but in particular Scots, parade up Fifth Avenue. Yet over 2 centuries have gone by since the American colony rose up against its English motherland. It was here in Manhattan on the 30th of April, 1789, that George Washington was sworn in as the first President of the United States. The Fraunces Tavern, where he would meet with his officers, and a few brick houses are the last remaining vestiges of those distant days when the United States had but 2.5 million inhabitants. Let's leave Wall Street, the banking and business district situated on the tip of Manhattan, for the city center. Chicago was the cradle of the skyscraper, but New York nurtured some of the most beautiful specimens. The early 30s witnessed 2 skyscrapers vying in speed and height as standard bearers of triumphal capitalism. The Empire State Building, 102 stories, 381 meters high, 73 elevators, 60,000 tons of steel, which was to remain undamaged when a B-25 bomber crashed into it on a foggy day in 1945. Today, it remains a veritable symbol of New York, along with its 30s rival, the Chrysler Building, whose stainless steel arrow peaks at 311 meters. Its 6-arched tiara, studded with triangular windows, remains the crowning glory of Art Deco imaginative elegance. Compared to these 2 stars of the golden age of skyscrapers, the glass facades of latter-day buildings are singularly lacking in personality. Yet people from all over the world live in the shadows of these buildings. Discovering New York is a little like touring the world. Beyond Brooklyn Bridge lies one of the city's Jewish quarters. Religious tolerance is very much part of the American identity. After all, wasn't it precisely to avoid persecution of one kind or another that so many immigrants flocked to this country? Here, the most traditional and the most liberal are free to express themselves in communities as numerous as they are diverse. Let's cross the East River, which separates Brooklyn and Manhattan. Another neighborhood, another style. Here we are in Greenwich Village. The Village, as its inhabitants call it, is the bohemian and literary heart of New York. Whether you're white, black, Oriental, Jew, or Muslim, the American melting pot is inescapable. It's in the end the best way of fusing the two cultures to which one belongs. Children of all nations, integrate. Chinatown. This tiny neighborhood swarms with 120,000 inhabitants. The street names, the shops, the products, the adverts, right down to the pagoda-shaped call boxes or the Confucius watching over the crossroads are all disorienting echoes of China. Chinatown, 20,000 newly arrived clothing workers from Hong Kong or the Chinese Republic and over 300 restaurants. Here, Cantonese or Mandarin is spoken more than English. A block further on, next to the Chinese Quarter, Little Italy is gradually being eaten into by its mighty neighbor. Those 800,000 New Yorkers of Italian origin have abandoned the district. What remains is the myth, the pizzerias, and the odd grocery store.
How long has this store been open?
25 years. It's been open for 25 years.
And you only sell Italian products?
Yes, only Italian products because we're in Little Italy where many Italians live.
Where do you come from?
I was born and raised in Calabria, in Mantea, which is in the province of Coscienza.
Far from the old world traditions of Europe, New Yorkers have invented their own way of life. Both a sport and a form of expression, on the streets of every neighborhood, basketball is king. Night enshrouds the city, tall and proud on its aisle. Its lights and arrows on their granite pedestals seem to stand upon the void. Having come to see a Broadway musical, we linger beneath the neon lights of Times Square to witness a surprising improvised concert. Central Park. This 350-hectare lung in the heart of Manhattan is the Sunday meeting place for joggers and cyclists. And skaters. The celebrated New York Marathon is approaching, and for its hundreds of contestants, training and timing intensifies.
29:10.
One doesn't run a 42-kilometer race unprepared. Beyond Central Park begins Harlem. With its 300,000 inhabitants, it's the symbol of Black America. The first blacks came to this neighborhood around 1910. Harlem quickly came to epitomize nightlife with its famous Cotton Club and Apollo Theater. White audiences would come here to listen to Billie Holiday, Count Basie, and Duke Ellington. Even if the Black America of Malcolm X is no longer that of the 30s jazzmen, wearing one's Sunday best is still the order of the day, with church-going women particularly fond of their hats. Let's go to Brooklyn. Here in a small parish, we spend our last emotional moments in New York. Simply listening.
And most of our songs have a message. God loves you, God still lives, that He is the answer, you could lean on Him, that He's able to supply all of your needs. And that's how we mix our music.
Joy to those of us that have it. Amen. Only time salvation should be a threat is when you don't have it. In the name of Jesus, glory unto God. Hallelujah. In the name of Jesus. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. In the name of Jesus. Lord, we love you. Lord, we love you. Lord, we love you. Lord, we love you. We place you first in our lives.
Music is a very real part of our service. It is derived from our ancestors that were brought over as slaves, and as they were in the fields picking cotton or whatever they were doing, they began to sing. And singing became a real. Most of the songs that we sing now are derived from old hymns way back in the days of slavery. The silver cloud sails slowly down the Hudson River and leaves New York. Though the rays of the setting sun may flood the Manhattan skyline, this city never sleeps. The painter Fernand Léger, who watched in admiration from his window one October evening in 1931, described it thus: "Neither cinema, photograph, nor documentary has managed to dull the amazing event, New York. It's a city which has withstood every vulgarization, the curiosity of every man who's tried to describe and copy her. She has kept her freshness, her unexpectedness, her surprise for the traveler who sees her for the first time."
Ahead, Verrazano Bridge guides us towards the open sea and to another America, the South. As we leave New York behind, the ship's crew lay on a special welcome for the passengers.
Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Casero, his senior officers, and the ship's company.
Have a great, excellent time on board the Silver Cloud. Thank you. Well, as a captain, you can be an excellent captain for a cargo ship, but if your public relations are not good, you're not suitable for a passenger ship. It is very important that you entertain and you have a good relation with the passenger, because they came on board to have a good time, to relax, and each one on board does his best. And we try to give the feeling to be a home away from home.
Following the captain's advice, passengers take advantage of their first morning aboard the Silver Cloud as she enters the great Chesapeake Bay, Virginia. Jamestown, Yorktown, and Williamsburg, three towns which make up what's called the Historic Triangle, cradle of American liberty from the earliest settlers right up to the War of Independence. Jamestown, situated on an island, became in the mid-18th century the first permanent English settlement in North America. Full-size replicas of the three boats which brought the first English settlers here are housed on the site. These ships were the Susan Constant, the Discovery, and the Godspeed. The crew in naval costume bear witness to another time's way of life.
13 sailors aboard Godspeed, and we'd have 39 passengers. They go via the Canary Islands, Grand Canaries, and across following the trade winds, same route as Christopher Columbus to the Caribbean, and then north from the Caribbean up to Virginia. They'd ultimately, the settlers who were aboard these ships would set up the first permanent English-speaking village and settlement in the New World.
Near Jamestown lies the charming village of Yorktown with its red brick houses and its well-kept gardens. Yet it was here in 1781 that a small band of patriots led by a certain George Washington fought the British in what was to be the last battle of the War of Independence.
I'm a history buff, and I served in the United States Navy for 29 years. So I have a sense of history from that perspective, and it's just very, very intriguing to me to live here in a place that is so full of history. So I like it very much.
Last leap into the past, Williamsburg, the United States' most famous museum town. In the center of the colonial town, the visitor is thrust 2 centuries into the past. Everything here, gardens, architecture, furniture, right down to the costumes of the artisans in the workshops and taverns, typifies the atmosphere of what was the first capital of Virginia.
Where are we now exactly?
Williamsburg, Virginia, colonial Williamsburg, which is the restored capital of the colony of Virginia prior to the Revolution, reconstructed on their original foundations that were unearthed through archaeology to what the town looked like in 1775 or so. Our mission is to teach people the history of early America, the early United States. What caused the American Revolution and why are we here today, in essence?
Here, they like to remind the younger generations that the New World is not without history. In this aquatic universe, bridges seem to multiply themselves. The bay is bathed in mysterious blue. We approach the silver cloud, drawn by lights and music.
She walks into a room and you know Mary poison was love. She's a special girl. One smile and suddenly nobody else just will through. You know you'll never be lonely with you. No. She walks into a room and in the residence, shining up generation. She's all the girlies take your best tonight. Side, give your attention to. I really have to mention she's the
On the second day of the cruise, having sailed up the Chesapeake's great waterways, we arrive at Annapolis, capital of Maryland and jewel of the bay. Like many other cities in the region, it jealously guards its historical heritage. It was here, in the United States' oldest parliament, that the peace treaty with the English was ratified. As Congress sat in Annapolis for 9 months from November 1783 to August 1784, it became the first capital of the United States, long before Washington, D.C. Frenchman Pierre-Charles L'Enfant, so impassioned by American independence that he actually crossed the Atlantic before Lafayette, drew up the plans for Washington in 1780. He designed a huge town around the capital, whose dome stands 82 meters above the Great Rotunda, flanked by the House of Representatives to the south and the Senate to the north. It's the highest building in Washington. A law forbids the building of anything taller except, of course, with all due decorum, the obelisk erected in honor of the father of the nation. The 36 Doric columns of the Lincoln Memorial represent the 36 states of the Union at the time of the Civil War. The Jefferson Memorial honors the authors of the Declaration of Independence, third President of the United States. Linking up these monuments, the 300-meter wide, 3.5-kilometer-long mall gives the city its best-known aspect. 7 out of 10 of Washington, D.C.'s inhabitants are black. Whites who work in the center generally live in Virginia or Maryland. The White House, the American presidential residence, today comprises 130 rooms built on a site chosen by George Washington, who never in fact lived there. His successor wished that it would be the home of honest men. Though the constant security has its drawbacks, the many visitors are generally happy with their visit. Diverse lobbies voice their grievances at the very doors of the White House, symbol of the world's first democracy. Of this town, which inscribes on its great monuments the philosophical legacy of the Founding Fathers, Charles Dickens said, "It has wonderful intentions." In the Silver Cloud's sumptuous dining room, the tables are laid out for the captain's dinner, beneath the attentive gaze of the head of the restaurant.
How many people do you have in your staff?
22 waiters, 4 vice stewards, 3 head waiters, and the head sommelier and myself.
The kitchen is a hive of activity, grating, carefully serving the caviar. Dressing the lobster.
Dressing. And then
Arranging the garnish. As we head towards Charleston, dinner is served. A voyage on board the Silver Cloud is not just history, it's also gastronomy.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have wonderful lobster, fresh flown in from Maine with a little salad. And enjoy the evening, bon appetit. Thank you. Thank you.
As in the grandest palaces, there are suites aboard luxury liners. The shipowner's suite is often the most luxurious. On board the Silver Cloud, its decor and walnut furniture are a foretaste of the splendid southern residences that await us. On the third day of our trip, we arrive in Charleston. Founded in 1670 in the estuaries punctuated by the Ashley and Cooper Islands, Charleston owes its name to Charles II of England.
The whole area is called the Low Country. We have a especially older section that was part of the original wall city that was started in 1680.
Charleston combines colonial elegance with a quarrelsome temperament. It fought with the English, the Spanish, the French, the Cherokees, and even the slaves who revolted in 1739, not forgetting the battles of the War of Independence. It was after Lincoln's election as president that Charleston distinguished itself in deciding to secede. South Carolina withdrew from the Union, and the city engaged the first submarine ever used in a naval battle. It was only after it was bombarded and evacuated by Sherman's men in 1865 that it surrendered.
Charleston is different than the American cities because we have a height limitation. So we try to be more European. All that we have are over 2,000 of these old and historic buildings.
How was the life in this period here in Charleston?
Life here in Charleston in that period was one filled of traveling. The wealthy plantation owners would have houses here in the city where they would come into the city in January to race their horses, and then they would stay for the social season of lots of dances and theaters, because the first theater under a roof in America was here in Charleston in the 1700s.
Along a magnificent driveway lined with aged oak trees, we arrive at Boone Hall Plantation. 50 years ago, on the grounds of this plantation, which dates back to 1681, a Georgian-style master's residence was built for the film Gone with the Wind. Almost everywhere, the opulence of the land has given birth to great wealth, richly reflected in the colonial houses with their splendid gardens, wherein many varieties of azalea, camellia, and glycine flower. These days, the Southern myth is knowingly kept alive, as is evident from our charming hostess. Did you say Scarlett?
In 1681, Major John Boone began receiving this land through a series of land grants from the English lord's proprietor. Over a period of time, he received 17,000 acres. Now Boone Hall consists of 738. In 1817, Major John Horlbeck purchased the land. He built a brick and tile kiln here on the plantation.
Outside, a woman weaves wicker hats as in days gone by.
Baskets making start here in Boone Hall since the 1600s. And the ladies in this area today are still making them.
The plantation economy depended upon slave labor for cotton picking. Despite independence, the number of slaves grew from 700,000 in 1790 to 4 million around 1860 on the eve of the Civil War.
These are the 9 slave cabins where the servants that work in the house, first-class people live in here. And the slave had like 10 board cabins on the other side of the street, which they're abolished now. But mostly the first-class people live in these brick cabinets. Servants that work in the house.
Here, clearly defined boundaries are maintained, though a page of history has turned. The rays of the setting sun bathe the facades of the colonial villas along the River Cooper. We stroll along the promenade. The bugle sounds. The star-spangled banner is lowered. And Charleston takes to dreaming about the South and the past. On board the Silver Cloud, each pursues their dream. Annette, the chambermaid, has hers.
Tomorrow we arrive in Savannah. Will you go ashore?
Of course. It's like nice to see America because I've never been there before.
Let's leave Annette to her dreams, and the casino players to theirs. Day 5 of the voyage. As morning breaks, we move slowly up the Savannah River. Having arrived in the center of Savannah City, capital of Georgia, the Silver Cloud docks with the help of powerful tugs. The history of Georgia is the history of cotton. It all began in 1789 when an Englishman named Samuel Slater emigrated to the United States with the intention of setting up the first American cotton mill. In 1793, Ellie Whitney invented the famous cotton gin, which mechanically separated the fiber from the seed, allowing production to double every 10 years. Cotton's fortune was made. In 1860, cotton represented 2/3 of the entire country's export revenue. Its cultivation, however, required ever more slaves. As the question of abolition was brought up, the Civil War broke out. A century later, cotton is still cultivated in Georgia.
This is what you call a cotton boll, and this is what it looks like when it's on the plant and is before the cotton comes out. This here is when the cotton is starting to come out, and it looks similar like that. And when it's ready, the cotton will look like so.
At Savannah's History Museum, numerous documents testify to the city's cotton past. The deep marks of slavery have remained in people's minds.
Back in the early days of the early 1900s and the 1800s, we have they had the blacks. We were known for slavery, and the slavery was the blacks were used for picking cotton and harvesting fields, clearing fields and working the fields for us. And that was we fed them, we clothed them, we gave them housing, and that way we used them in the fields as slavery. Some people nowadays they still have blacks working for them, but they pay them money for what they're worth, and they have their own way of going nowadays. They have their own means of housing, and that changed back during the Civil War. But nowadays we don't have any slavery in the South.
Established in 1887 on the waterfront, the Cotton Exchange, where all of Georgia's cotton was bought and sold, has hardly changed since it was built. Today it houses the Solomon Masonic Lodge, set up in 1734. This town, where the writer Flannery O'Connor was born, has that undeniable charm of the South. Numerous splendid houses bear witness to the luxurious life of the cotton dealers.
This is the house of William Washington Gordon the first and the second. William Washington Gordon the first was the first of 4 generations of Gordons to live here in the house. Now, he was the co-founder of the Central of Georgia Railway, very important in bringing cotton from the nearby plantations to the seaport, where it was shipped all over the world. Now, his son was a very rich man who made his money in buying and selling cotton.
It's in this house that Juliet Gordon Low, founder of the Women's Scout Movement in 1912, was born.
Now, the young ladies in the 1880s many times would change clothes throughout the day, as many as 7 or 8 times throughout the day. And when they changed their clothes, it was a very big operation because they had their waist pinched in with a corset to an 18-inch waistline, which was sometimes difficult to attain. And they had as many as 14 petticoats, which was a very big operation. Well, now picture trying to change all these clothes with your waist pinched in so narrow that you could hardly breathe. And occasionally they would have to sit down, and they usually in their bedroom had a chaise lounge where they could sort of relax and catch their breath in between changing clothes this many times.
Charming vestiges of a bygone age, symbols of the Grand South and of Louisiana, the paddle steamers revolutionized river transport until the early 1870s, when they gave way to expanding rail transport.
Right now, yesterday we did the last port of a call. This is what is called the colonial cruise. So we're in Savannah, and right now we are in the southwest portion of the North Atlantic Ocean, heading towards Nassau. And we expect to be there tomorrow morning.
The last show in American waters. Tomorrow the music will be colored Caribbean. We are nearing the Bahamas, an archipelago composed of thousands of islands and islets which lies just 80 kilometers from Florida. The Silver Cloud arrives in Nassau, capital of the Bahamas, situated on the little island of New Providence. If one discounts the gaming in the many casinos on New Providence and Paradise Islands, and the resident status of the many companies in search of fiscal paradise, then the archipelago's main resource must doubtless be the sun. The sun shines here all year round. Nassau's statue of Christopher Columbus commemorates his first setting foot on New World soil. The landscape has undoubtedly changed a lot since his arrival in San Salvador in 1492. Vestiges of an age when the European powers, the French and the English in particular, fought over the Antilles and the Caribbean islands, forts rise up over Nassau.
Where you are right now, you're located on Fort Fincastle, built by John Murray or Lord Dunmore, the Earl of Dunmore and the Viscount of Fincastle. He was also a former governor of Virginia during the American Revolutionary Wars. The fort was built in anticipation of a French Revolution during the time of Napoleon Bonaparte.
Let's leave our extravagant guide with his baritone voice and his giant silhouette and go to the Ardastra Zoo. Flamboyant parrots charm the children.
Whoa. Hey, boy. Look, there's a little lover boy out in Salvador head. Hey.
Yet what the zoo and its keeper are most proud of are the pink flamingos, symbol of the Bahamas.
We feed them shrimp, give them bread chow, calf manna, and beets and carrots. And dye, they got a beautiful color.
In the Bahamas, everything is pink, from the official buildings to the school uniforms.
We became independent from 1973. The British has left us with, still we drive on the left side of the street. The courthouses, the lawyers and the magistrates wear the white wigs. On our currency, on our dollar bills, we still have the Queen's head. And all schools, private and public schools, they have to wear uniforms.
Christopher Columbus's caravel and the pink flamingos both feature in the coats of arms which adorn the pediments of the public buildings. Even the car registration plates commemorate Columbus's discovery of America. As a final concession to England, the Bahamas are still part of the Commonwealth. The governor's official vehicles still bear the crown of Her Royal Majesty. Yet, as Lord and Master here, Christopher Columbus, his statue holding sway over the entrance to the governor's palace, gazes into the distance. In search of a new America? The silver cloud arrives in New York. The gleaming luxury liner elegantly glides over the calm waters of the Hudson River. Slowly, the silver cloud sails along the waterfront of Manhattan Island, where she's to dock.
You can pass Lincoln Center, Columbus Circle, Times Square.
Where do you come from?
I came from Georgia, south of Russia.
Where do other cab drivers come from?
Oh, from all over. Any country you can see cab driver.
It's October 12th, a bank holiday in the United States. Christopher Columbus's arrival in the New World is feasted as only the Americans know how. Brass bands of every nationality, but in particular Scots, parade up Fifth Avenue. Yet over 2 centuries have gone by since the American colony rose up against its English motherland. It was here in Manhattan on the 30th of April, 1789, that George Washington was sworn in as the first President of the United States. The Fraunces Tavern, where he would meet with his officers, and a few brick houses are the last remaining vestiges of those distant days when the United States had but 2.5. Here for us, another voyage is to begin, through American history. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Inscribed on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty, this poem by Emma Lazarus symbolizes for millions of immigrants the accomplishment of an arduous journey to the Promised Land. Over 16 million such people passed through Ellis Island between 1925 and 1954. New York, the melting pot of civilization, a city of gigantism and conflict, a phoenix whose feathers come from every country in the world. Port, ghetto, village, arrogant metropolis mirroring itself in water, New York is all of that. She entices, she exasperates, a hotbed of activity, of ups and downs. New York is change incarnate. The New York metropolis comprises over 17 million inhabitants. Everyone's on the lookout for work. It's what drives the country. New York's yellow cabs ride out the regular waves of immigration. After the Pakistani and the Haitians, it's now immigrants from the former USSR who are behind the wheel.
If you go all the way Broadway,
Of Art Deco imaginative elegance. Compared to these two stars of the golden age of skyscrapers, the glass facades of latter-day buildings are singularly lacking in personality. Yet people from all over the world live in the shadows of these buildings. Discovering New York is a little like touring the world. Beyond Brooklyn Bridge lies one of the city's Jewish quarters. Religious tolerance is very much part of the American identity. After all, wasn't it precisely to avoid persecution of one kind or another that so many immigrants flocked to this country? Here, the most traditional and the most liberal are free to express themselves in communities as numerous as they are diverse. Let's cross the East River, which separates Brooklyn and Manhattan. Another neighborhood, another style. Here, 1 million inhabitants. Let's leave Wall Street, the banking and business district situated on the tip of Manhattan, for the city center. Chicago was the cradle of the skyscraper, but New York nurtured some of the most beautiful specimens. The early 30s witnessed two skyscrapers vying in speed and height as standard bearers of triumphal capitalism. The Empire State Building, 102 stories, 381 meters high, 73 elevators, 60,000 tons of steel, which was to remain undamaged when a B-25 bomber crashed into it on a foggy day in 1945. Today, it remains a veritable symbol of New York, along with its 30s rival, the Chrysler Building, whose stainless steel arrow peaks at 311 meters. Its six-arched tiara, studded with triangular windows, remains the crowning glory